Hello. So, if I could have your attention, I think we should. I think we should get started. I appreciate everybody coming out tonight. Let me say a little bit about what we have in mind for this meeting. I know many of you have gone over the years and recently to many quote unquote community meetings that are called by various political and economic interests. This is a community meeting called by the community, and the focus of this particular conversation, which we expect to be the first of many, or first of a sequence. The experimental station is committed to providing a forum and a venue for ongoing conversation. What we'd like to do tonight is, as a conversation, truly as a conversation. I have no presentation and no wisdom to provide. I'm really just going to try to facilitate a conversation of the group. But the aim and the focus of the conversation is to begin to identify the range of issues and questions that need to be addressed in the course of the multifaceted development that is fast approaching this part of the South Side, this part of the city. And so our hope is that collectively we can identify a range of issues, identify questions that people want answers to, identify occasions for journalistic inquiry, things that my colleagues and I and other journalists could look more deeply into. So we're really looking in this first meeting to create a kind of a map of issues, a map of questions, a map of community concerns. My colleague Bachi is going to capture everything on these large pieces of paper, which we'll array on the wall. And then we'll spend some time after the meeting trying to take that map to the next stage. It's a work in progress. It's something we'll continue to do. We'll come back to. It will change over time. It will be dynamic. But the aim is for the community to set the agenda in terms of this process going forward. I've lived my whole life on the South Side. I was born to bulldozers in urban renewal. I spent a decade and a half documenting the demolition of public housing in the old black belt of the city, which had been demolished to create the public housing high-rises. We've had a lot of experience in this city with big social engineering projects and big development promises and the collateral damage they cause and the questions that we only really address after the fact. So the aspiration and the hope is that the community can insert itself in this process in a way that really shapes the discourse going forward. And I know many of you in this room have been working hard on these issues, and in my role tonight, which is limited, I'm going to try to just make a virtue of ignorance and try to learn from you about what the issues are, some of the relationships between those issues, the sequence of questions that need to be engaged, the things that are foundational for addressing the next things. And the way I propose we do this is that people who want to speak, to address the questions that I've put in play, come up to one of the two microphones here, which are facing the audience, not facing me, because this is a community conversation. And we will do all that we can to capture everything said. We're also recording the event, and one of our hopes for this and future events is that we'll create the conditions for some of the policymakers and the institutions involved in this actually to listen to the community, which in my experience doesn't much happen in the conventional community meeting. So those are our aspirations, but it's really up to you guys to make this happen, and it's something we can only do together in terms of having a real conversation. So I invite people to come up and offer their thoughts, and again, as much as possible, focusing on what are the issues? We don't need to resolve them tonight, but it would be great to come out with the resources and ingredients to create a really refined and evolving map of issues and community concerns. So have at it. No, Stan, please address everybody. And if you would say your name before you make your comments.
My name is Alan Lindrup. I'm a former resident of Hyde Park. I'm now a resident of South Shore for the last 6 years. And my question, we've heard that Rainbow Beach, that the Jackson Park PAC had given its stamp of approval to this new PGA golf course. And from what we've heard from residents, certainly at least in the South Shore area, they're not very enthusiastic about this decision, and a lot of people in South Shore are not. And I suspect that's true in other areas, and it doesn't seem like the Jackson Park PAC went out and got a lot of community input before giving its stamp of approval, and it's kind of like, the process being jammed down the community's, throats without adequate input. So that's
so would one way of framing that as a question be, what was the process that yielded the approval?
Yeah.
But okay. Harold?
Yes, Harold Lucas, Black Metropolis Convention and Tourism Council. I've been working on creating Brownsville as an international tourism destination for about 30 years. But I think the first conversation is looking at the geographics of the South Lakefront. As a native Chicagoan, born 662 East 38th Place in Ida B. Wells, I am a native son. My nickname is the Brownsville Curmudgeon because I fuss about the University of Chicago, the 800-pound gorilla, and the term spatial deconcentration in Anthony Downs, which is the infrastructure plan of why they are disenfranchising African Americans in Chicago. But you have to understand it from a geographic perspective. And so let's look at it from the South Lakefront within the Millennium Reserve Initiative. And you need to look that up if you don't know what that is. It's an initiative by President Obama to create the largest urban park in America in Chicago on the South Lakefront. And so you look at that boundary map, and you'll see the south and southwest side lakefront. Now, let's go up the lakefront. From our northern boundary is 18th Street. Right? South Loop is contesting that, the new South Loop is contesting that now. And they're saying their southern boundary is 35th Street, right? So we're going based on where we were restricted by legal restricted covenants between 1916 and 1948 by the University of Chicago that contained us in that narrow band of land, 3.5 miles by 1.5 miles wide, up to the point of them building all those high-rise public housing to contain us, to keep us from mixing with the rest of the city. So what's being built is a $500 million Michael Reese Hospital site, 3 new bridges to the lakefront. 35th Street is in, one coming in the 43rd, one coming in the 41st, 2 more new bridges. You have the Presidential Library, the privatization of Jackson Park, the golf course, right? We were part of the group that saved South Shore Country Club from demolition because they said all we could do was play basketball. And the president and everybody else been married out there since we saved it in '93. All right? Leave there, you go to the South Shore, South U.S. Steel, where 12,000 units of housing and a whole new commercial district is being built, and 90% of the people 2 blocks from there shooting each other in the head over drugs, right? Huh? Then you go on out to the Pullman National Park, right? That just got awarded by your president. He came out and awarded. That's the backdrop of the South Lakefront region of Chicago. It's going upscale, and the real estate agents from the University of Chicago have got in. They bought all the real estate already, right? They're moving the Hispanics in from the South and the West, subsidizing them with Sanctuary City against African Americans. The murder rate has not, they've taken the guns off the street, but the murder rate has not gone down in the black community because the killing is part of the plan to run us out of Chicago. That's the bottom line of where we are in this dialogue, and I'll open with that.
So Harold, before you step back, let's translate some of that into larger questions that can be pursued. I mean, so you're first of all saying that you can't understand what's happening in Jackson Park, for example, without looking at the larger geography. Right.
You cannot begin to decipher it unless you have a macro perspective of the South
Right.
Lakefront region of Chicago.
Right.
That comes into focus with the Millennium Reserve Initiative. There's federal money been invested in setting up the landscape for outdoor recreation, maritime, right? Right, the Port Authority, right? Still the transportation hub of the nation, technology infrastructure, right? Go look at the old Donnelly plant. It's a hub carrier hotel, right? So Silicon Valley's sitting right here right now, right? It's going upscale. The South Loop is pushing into Bronzeville, right? It's being disinvested in with the indigenous black population, and the Hispanics are being brought in to destabilize us also. The move is to get rid of black people before the election comes so Rahm can get reelected, right? Who got endorsed twice by who? President Barack Obama. So who's the trick?
I'm Frank Avalon. I live in Hyde Park. Professionally, I do anti-gentrification, anti-displacement work all over the city of Chicago. I agree with much of the statements we just heard from this gentleman, except to say that Hispanics are not our enemies. They're our fellow citizens. I want to make a quick comment and then ask a question. My comment is, as we enter the era of the Anthropocene, of climate change, we cannot rest the well-being of Chicago on the well-being of wealthy tourism. It has to be democratically decided at the local and even the neighborhood level about what we perceive as a humane neighborhood, a sense of place, a sense of belonging. 60% of Chicago's housing is rental housing. Tenants are given short shrift in all of this. I want to then encourage us to say that catering to tourism to be a global city is not the way of the future. It is a way to impoverish us 10 years down the road. My question is this: as we enter this era that we're already beginning, public ownership of as many things as possible is critical. We cannot privatize water. We should have as much public housing as possible, and we should certainly control our land. Why on earth would we want to give away the golf course to capitalism? The real threat is not our Hispanic brothers and sisters, but a handful of wealthy capitalists. And so in that regard, the question I have is, people need to be very clear what exactly, because I don't know, is the plan for Jackson Park Golf Course. Is it to sell it outright, to privatize it? Why would we want that? What benefit could there possibly be to any of us? And I golf. As a lawyer, my warning is, if they tell you that it's not a sale but a long-term lease, they're the same thing.
Hi, my name is Ray Lodato, and I want to follow up on what the gentleman just said, even though we don't know each other. My comments are going to be just following up on yours. One of the things I learned from working with Jamie for many years is to think of the big picture, and I want us to think in terms of what makes a healthy community. I think we know that a good community has good jobs, it has some level of security, it has good housing stock, and it also has places for people to recreate. We have a unique asset in Jackson Park, and we keep thinking of the center as being additive, but there's a subtraction going on as well. We really are going to be losing the park, and we have to make sure that if we're going to accede to that, that we do that with our eyes wide open. Think of it in terms of other communities that have this amenity. If the next president of the United States comes from the north side of Chicago, how much of Lincoln Park do you think they'll give over to a presidential library? Right? Okay. That's what I thought, yeah. So we need to protect our community assets. We're faced really with a binary choice of having the park or not having the park. The economic forecasts from the center are very rosy, and I think they know they're too rosy, which is why they're not willing to sign a community benefits agreement. But I want us to think of a couple of questions and think about the implications of what we're doing here. If after the groundbreaking, the construction workers show up and they look mostly like me, we don't get the park back, okay? If there aren't 2,500 jobs as a result of the library and the presidential center, and there are a lot fewer, we don't get the park back. If there's a long line of traffic every morning on Stony Island because we've lost Cornell Drive, we don't get the park back. So we really have to seriously think about what it is we're giving up collectively in these communities. We have such a unique asset that other neighborhoods in Chicago and even other cities would, really want in their community, and we have to think about whether this is the best place for it.
Can I just respond, Ray, to part of that? As Ray knows, and some of you may know, I have run through Chicago parks for 50-odd years now, as an athlete, and through all this extraordinary archipelago of parks we have, from Washington Park through the Midway to Jackson Park to the lakefront. And when the Olympics were contemplated in Chicago, and the major stadium was to be sited in Washington Park, I actually conceived a project that we spent some time on, and then they lost the bid. So we didn't complete it. That might be really important to do now. What powerful interests do when they want to claim land is they essentially declare it empty. When westward expansion, we sort of if you look at maps of westward expansion, before westward expansion, the maps the maps of explorers are an absolute patchwork of native populations and inhabited land. When it comes time for the westward expansion, it's an empty continent. The whole public housing process that I lived through so intimately, it wasn't just a matter of demolition. It was a matter of the creation of a vacant lot, a blank slate. So, to have this narrative that there's going to be this vast improvement of Jackson Park, it seems one of the counter narratives that we should be considering is really demonstrating, dramatizing, documenting what an extraordinary asset it is in its present form. To defeat that rhetorical strategy of declaring places empty in order to control them, take them over.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sort of following up on what you just said, today I rode my bike from 61st and University. Suzanne Allender. I rode my bike today from 61st and University through Jackson Park, right through where the library is supposed to be located, and through the park down to the 57th Street underpass, and then down the lakefront all the way to McCormick Place and back. That was pretty good for me. And the thing is that I'm wondering tonight, will I still be able to do that? Will there be so many people around the library that I won't be able to safely ride my bike through it, that area and other areas in the park? And additionally, I drive a car, and because of where I live, I habitually take Cornell Drive in order to get to the north side, or wherever I'm going, to the Loop, et cetera. And I just can't imagine how that's going to work when the Midway is closed off, Cornell Drive is closed off. How do I get onto Lakeshore Drive? Where? And through what kind of traffic jams?
Other thoughts, comments, questions?
My name is Janice Miserel Mitchell. I'm a composer. I live in Hyde Park, and I've been there for 40 years. My spouse works on landscape, and so I have some information that I think is really interesting in terms of our current situation when we look at the formation of Central Park in New York. Central Park initially, before it was changed by Olmsted, and he did a beautiful job, granted, had African American communities, Native American communities, and a friend of mine said that they had missionaries, her family was missionaries, and they had a house in the park. These high rollers came in and they started building the large apartments on Fifth Avenue, and they wanted a beautiful park for themselves and something to look at. And the powers that be commissioned Olmsted to make Central Park. So I think we need to think about institutions and institutions of power, and I know we are talking about that. We know the institutions that have helped to create the plan for Jackson Park, and I think we need to think of some way that we can create our own institution, because we know we don't have an alderman who's going to be helping us, but we need to form something that will be a substantial voice of the neighborhood. And so I'm hoping we can arrive at that tonight.
So a question would be, what would be the organizational vehicle for
Yes.
community to really
Yes,
insert
right.
itself in the process?
Yeah, and just one small thing, because being a musician, I always loved going to jazz at the South Shore Cultural Center, and Jazz Unites had wonderful festivals for years and years. And I'm thinking about the Coalition to Save the South Shore Club. That was 16 organizations, I believe, and that was in the early 70s. So if we can look at some prototypes where these things had worked before, maybe we can create something for ourselves. Okay.
Hello, my name is Ann Holcomb. I'm a South Shore resident, and I'm the chair of a block club. And the block club is called Ethos. It stands for Environment, Transportation, Health, and Open Space. We've been around since 2014. We're a non-traditional block club, though we are registered with the CAPS program. And we are a mixed income group, a multiracial group, and a multi-generational group. And we're, as of today, 47 members strong. So I'd like to, if it's at all possible, I'd like to read 3 paragraphs to you. It's a summary of a 2-page statement that over 22 members put their input into, okay? So I really want all the members that took a lot of time to prepare, and I have copies of the full statement as well, but I'm not gonna read it. It's 2 full pages, but I'd like to read this, and it's a letter that I wrote that I hope will get published in the Hyde Park Herald, but I don't know if it will. My last one didn't, so we'll see what happens.
Let me also suggest that you don't place it by the door so people can
Yeah,
get it and take a look.
absolutely. Yeah, I brought 30 copies. I don't think that's quite enough, but feel free to take them, and I can always email you more, okay? I'm deeply disappointed that the Jackson Park PAC continues to affirm the proposed PGA golf course plans. It was clear during the last public meeting held by the 5th Ward Alderman that numerous residents of the southeast side have significant concerns about these plans that have not been adequately addressed. The Ethos Block Club that I represent outright opposes these plans. I thought that PACs were supposed to represent the residents who use the parks, not pro-golfers and tourists from elsewhere. Southeast Side residents have already given up significant acreage for the Obama Library. Ethos believes we should not be forced to give up more, including our beloved nature sanctuary, our dog park, open space for family reunions, and the Chosen Few House Music Fest, and existing facilities for sports that our youth engage in. We also fear the profit motive with this golf course will become greater and more powerful over time than any compromises, concessions, or promises that the PGA sponsors might make to us now, such as stating that our South Shore Cultural Center will remain available for resident utilization. And some of us don't think it's even available now when you consider all the space rentals that are in there. That there won't be a wall built around the golf course. We've been told that. But a wall would prevent peepers from watching tournaments for free when hefty admission prices are charged to watch the PGA tournaments. That local amateur golfers will continue to have affordable, ready access to the course. We had 3 golfers that participated in writing the statement, okay? And they're very concerned about the course becoming too challenging, about having to be regulated to off hours, having huge green fees, not being able to have access to the course when they're able to use it. We're also concerned about the traffic and the arterial street closures, and that parking will be fully accommodated without sacrificing even more green space. We're already seeing the footprint for the Obama Library grow as they're now talking about building a parking garage in the Midway, which was not part of the original plan. The list of problems for those of us who live here continues, and what are the benefits? Do we really think that PGA golfers and their fans will regularly shop at the small, minority-owned businesses in our communities? These are the type of businesses we want to see proliferate in South Shore, and we've recently had some starts. We have 2 bakeries now that just sprung up, one that's been there a couple years, one that just opened. We have a vegan restaurant that's a sit-down restaurant. We have some really nice things that are just starting to happen. So, but we don't think that PGA golfers are gonna come and use those. Will PGA golfers and their fans bring a grocery store to South Shore? We haven't had a grocery store for 4 years. Or put the young men standing on our corners into a job program. Do you really think, realistically, even for a minute, that the Young Caddy program that PGA planners are touting will help large numbers of our Southeast Side youth? In my professional life, I supervise a homeless youth shelter, and I kind of threw this idea out to some of the random young men that we are serving on an outreach basis, and they poo-pooed it down flat. I said, Caddy, what are you talking about? You know? So I don't think this is for us. Ethos wants change and redevelopment, just not this. Ethos advocates for the PGA plans to be thrown out and an independent researcher brought in who would do extensive focus groups and surveys of our residents to determine what we want and need for the future of Jackson Park. We want the people's park that Obama recently described. We have lots of great ideas for self-determination, but we have not been asked. The PGA plans are so fast-tracked that opportunities for true community input are extremely limited, including input that many of us don't want this at all. Was this perhaps part of the PGA golf course sponsor's plan? Why did the Jackson Park PAC ever sign on to this without thoroughly asking the communities? And I'd like to add one more thing, and that why is it that no larger organizations are not right now forming? Where are the larger organizations? Where are Friends of the Parks? Where are some of the larger organizations to stand up and say, we want this to stop, we want this to at least slow down, maybe stop it, and see what those of us that live here really want? Thank you.
That's good. Can I also just throw out, and maybe this has been done, but if it hasn't, it's definitely a journalistic occasion. Has anybody looked at how PGA operation actually of comparable sort of size and footprint in an urban area operates? I mean, I think somebody should go explore that. So I would be interested, we should talk, I mean, any sort of tips or leads as to how journalists could really look into, sort of foresee the future that you were evoking with evidence from elsewhere of how these things operate. I'm sorry.
Quickly, my name is Sharon Lewis, L-O-U-I-S. I moved with my parents to Jackson Park in 1966. My mom is still currently in her home, and I have homes in South Shore as well. There are just 2 points I want to make. One, I'm not sure if you guys are aware that North Avenue Beach has just opened or will be opening in August, the Shore Club. You can look it up. It's going to be a very upscale club along the beach. You can, it's been totally monetized. You can, for the air and water show, you can secure a space for anywhere between $125 and $750. There'll be cabanas and 3 different restaurants, and for Sunday brunch, you need to secure your seating online. So you would have to do that in advance. Again, it's called Shore Club will bring upscale dining to North Avenue Beach. The second point, and I echo what everyone else has said, My kids used to go to camp at the Cultural Center. They're now 29 and 31. They were counselors once they aged out of being campers. But this Thursday at 6 o'clock at the South Shore Chamber Office, 1750 East 71st Street, the organization who is leading the charge on the golf course will be there. So I think anyone who wants to question them face to face, this would be a good opportunity. Also, Dr. Carol Adams, who is said to be our community representative, will be there as well. So I think this is the first meeting where they're going to be actually sitting down with the community and hearing, other than those unwieldy meetings that they had already where we got no answers, no responses. 1750 East 71st Street on this Thursday at 6 o'clock, South Shore Chamber.
I'm Connie Spreen. I'm the executive director excuse me, of Experimental Station, where you are. I have, I guess, a couple of points, observations. One is that I think that, just in hearing people talk about the developments, and I really mean developments, there really are multiple developments that we're talking about. It's not just one thing. And I think that there is a tendency that I'm hearing, not necessarily here, but just generally in the kind of conflating the various projects. So there is the Obama Center, there is the golf course, and there is also a lot of development taking place right here to the south. And something that has very much concerned me is that, I'm hearing some wonderful mission-driven statements from the Obama Center. And I think, I hear these things and I get really excited and think I'm really happy to have that center so close by, because I think it can do some terrific things for this neighborhood and for people in it. But at the same time, then I hear about what is happening just directly to the south, and we've had New York developers actually come to this building and tout how they have purchased tons, I quote, tons of properties in Woodlawn, Washington Park, and Bronzeville, and that this is an amazing investment opportunity for New York City. And so I worry terribly about that, because I think you can have all the good intentions in the world, but if there is no kind of coordination between these projects, and if there is no common vision, and I think what seems to be missing for me in the whole conversation is there is no unified vision. People would like a CBA signed, and I don't think that's going to happen. And I have actually kind of reached out to the city and Department of Urban Planning and said, they could get out in front of it and work with the Obama Foundation. I have come to agree with people about that golf course. I used to be a golfer too, but that it seems like a terrible idea from my perspective. But what is the common vision that they share so that we can imagine? And I'm executive director, so I am constantly fundraising, constantly putting out, a vision about what we as an organization are going to do. And in doing that, I'm projecting outcomes. And, all the decisions that I make and that we make as an organization are trying to achieve those outcomes. And so what I think would be beneficial to us is that, these various projects listen to us, these various big, developments, hear the community and help to create some outcomes that are our vision. And so that as they are making decisions, those decisions are coordinated and lead toward that vision. Whereas I have a sense now that they're being handled very independently, and there is no coordination and there is absolutely no vision.
And I would just add to that I think we have to recognize that our experience in Chicago is these institutions, whatever their avowed intentions, whatever their perhaps genuine and deeply felt intentions, don't know how to interact with the community, don't know how to have a community, don't know how to have a conversation with the community. So it's really, I think, the spirit of this meeting, that it's on us to create those to create those occasions, those mechanisms of accountability to the community, because they don't exist and they're not coming from those institutions. If anything, I mean, if the history of the city and development of the city testifies to anything, it's that.
Yeah, my name is Charles Staples, a longtime community activist here in natural conservation of natural areas, also architectural preservation. And in addition, I was actively opposed to the building of this huge Olympic stadium in Washington Park. It was amazing how little opposition there was to that. But anyhow, my main concern right now I think the Jackson Park plans are being pushed on us much too fast with too little consideration. I don't think that we should write off Washington Park. I think that should still be under consideration. Actually, it would have been better in terms of less loss of park space, because there was, I understood, 11 acres of available private land there along King Drive, just west of Washington Park, that could have been employed, I think, so that if they needed any additional land in Washington Park, there could be an overpass, but it would take a lot less parkland. Also, the fact that I think that having the Obama Center there would be a much better thing for the Bronzeville economy. They could really use the boost there. So I don't think that should be written off. Architecturally, I'm worried about the design of the Obama Center, because the main building, the museum there, has a strange puffed up look. It bulges so that there are no vertical walls in it. It's almost as though they want to stuff additional contents into it by pushing it out. But the sad thing about that is, if you have a museum, you need vertical wall space for display. And there is no vertical wall space in that particular planned building, and I think that should absolutely be altered. I don't think they should do that. So anyhow, those are my contributions to this debate here. Right. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Jamie. I'm Naomi Davis, the founder of Blacks in Green. I'm wearing several hats here this evening. I am also one of the co-founders of the Bronzeville Regional Collective. And a word about that group is that we were the first organization back in 2014 to reach out to the Obama Foundation and to specifically request engagement with the community around benefits, a community benefits agreement, concrete terms, negotiations. Best practices are not hard to come by in America anymore. There are cities across the country which have more or less successfully negotiated with neighbors to say, okay, this is our place, and we welcome you on certain conditions. So I have to take issue with Connie that I absolutely believe a community benefits agreement is going to happen. I'm not looking for evidence of that in the present moment. I'm looking within the resolve of the people of the neighborhoods, and I'm looking at the high road and what's right and what must be done to specify, document, measure, track, report, pay, or otherwise pay back assets, funding that's received from our public pool. So the Bronzeville Regional Collective is auguring for a regional approach. So the South Lakefront, okay, that is an economic jewel, we know that. And we also know that within the last couple of years, property prices have increased 20%. I absolutely agree with what Connie said about the speculators. I've had people come down my block, the portfolio purchasers. They drive through regularly. We know from Dubai, from London, from Sao Paulo, they're coming, they're here. And if Gensler is to be believed in the report that they did for One Woodlawn, we're already in Woodlawn approximately, not quite, 80% owned by investors. What does that mean? That means overnight, with the flick of a switch, most people can't afford another $100 on their rent, let alone $300, let alone doubled. And yet, what are we doing proactively? Yes, there are practices that are implemented around the country that should have been implemented, tracked, organized around 2-3 years ago when the idea that the Southland was the latest, greatest place for development to happen. So, all right, spilt milk, whatever, we've got now, and we've got to take action. So I want to tell you about another group, which is the, long name, Obama Library Southside Community Benefits Agreement Coalition. And, and with the thousands of people that we've convened over the last over a year, I want to say, on the one hand, I agree. There has not emerged a vision, something sparkling, something meaningful, something thematic, something cohesive, something sexy, with numbers attached to it. That is our fault. Meetings generate what we know, research generates what we don't know, and when you put the two together, you're supposed to have a master plan that gets people excited, and investors don't have to be that guy across town with a line of credit. Anybody in this room ought to be an investor, and we ought to be owning the place that we live in. Now, how do we do that? We've got a treasurer that says he's got a few hundreds of millions of dollars laying around that he'd like to put to good use in the neighborhoods. We declare this ought to be the age of the neighbor, investor, and developer. Can I get an amen? Amen. Amen. The neighbor, investor, and developer. We've got this idea that only someone from afar, from a shining hill, can come and save us, that only certain people can figure out how to build a building and finance it. That couldn't be further from the truth. And if it were true, where's the technical assistance pool that could be put together to make sure that neighbors were enabled, that the properties that the city owns, thousands of lots, are not given away to normal, average, everyday, quid pro quo investors and business people, but that we demand more for our public assets than just, oh, well, you're getting some affordable housing. So what? I can find a developer that'll give me affordable housing in these 12 terms. Okay? People want to be here. People want to invest. We can afford to take the time to sift and sort and get the best of those. And while we're doing that, while we're sorting them out, we can sort ourselves out. If you don't own property and you want to own property, you're in this group. We've got something for you. If you own a place and you want to own 4 or 5 more, you're in this group. We've got something for you. If you want to build if you want to teach builders, all of this infrastructure for what's necessary to revive this broken place that we love, all of that is possible, and all we have to do is insist on it.
A question. Are you? I don't.
Oh, you want to ask me a question?
I want to ask you a question.
Okay.
So, do we know how much land the city controls at this point in the relevant neighborhoods?
Yeah, we do. It's very knowable. It's right online.
Do you know off the top of your head?
Off the top of my head, I couldn't say.
So we'll say that's definitely a question to be pursued. Is in the midst of this, how much land, whatever speculation is going on.
Are you talking about like the?
Well, however we define the neighborhood.
Yeah,
but,
because to your point, Jamie, if we put a dot on the map where the Obama Presidential Center is, and then we drew an arc around it, not just Washington Park, Woodlawn, and South Shore, but those other Grand Crossing, South Gearing, and Avalon Park. If we looked at that, and we looked at just the way the portfolio buyers are coming in, they're going all the way down to Pullman, which is now a national monument. And so when we talk about development on the south side, we're talking about development on the south side and all of the south side. The question is, what are our standards? What are our design guidelines? What are the zoning ordinances that have to be changed?
But to come back to that question, if you define it that broadly, the south side down to Pullman, I think it just would be helpful to know what the city controls amid all the speculation that's going on.
Well, I have an index that I keep on my computer.
I'm just putting the question in play. I'm not.
But the point of those lots, the city did one thing good when it made the large lot program. Raise your hand if you got a large lot. Any of you? No? Okay. So it was a fabulous program, not perfect, but great. In other words, how do you get land in the hand of neighbors? Okay? For $1 and whatever back taxes you owe, your tickets or whatever. The land that the city owns is the last best salvation for stabilizing our neighborhoods, and we should demand that land be prioritized for neighbor investors and developers. If we want to build a school, a chapel, a factory, all of these things can be done through a community land trust to help stabilize affordability over time. And then I just want to say, regarding segregation, integration, diversity, ownership, there is nothing more important than ownership of the land. We have commoditized housing, so we're flipping it and we're refining it, and we're not paying attention to rooting in place and knowing our neighbors and connecting intergenerationally. So that's one thing the Community Land Trust can help you do. But you've got to have a commitment first, you've got to have a spirit for it, and you've got to organize. So the Community Land Trust is a tool that is highly recommended for that. When you decide to live somewhere, most people are deciding where they can afford to live. Some people are living because they want to live with the people who are around them. And I say, as someone who grew up in a segregated neighborhood, that was paradise. That was a Norman Rockwell painting. All the lawns were kept and all the kids were college bound. I don't have a problem with segregated communities. And I think that the land grab that's happening now does threaten to displace these great migration legacy communities that have made this city great and that that's not an acceptable outcome. We have to understand that the extreme racial wealth disparity in America is always going to make it easier for a white person to own a property in a place than a black person. I'm a person who believes that it's time to level the playing field, that this moment in history of the Obama Center is the perfect time and the perfect place to do it. And I invite you to come out on August 16th, Wednesday, for the Sustainability and Transportation Forum. Get it in writing series, St. Philip Neri High School, 6
So-
to 8 p.m.
Make sure we have that information. and
I
we'll
will.
put it out. Thank you. Naira.
Thank you for listening.
Well, question, yeah. A question, yeah. Why don't you come to the mic so people can hear the question? Yeah, if you just would ask the question, yeah. Why don't you start at the beginning? So
Yes,
people can hear.
I'm terribly sorry. My name is Fareed Mohammed. Just from a tactical perspective, I'm wondering, I'm not an attorney. I'm not an attorney, but from a tactical perspective, I'm wondering, has there been any effort considered in terms of trying to delay, challenge, and forestall some of the timeline that, these machinations that are unfolding now, to try to get some input in terms of influencing that timeline? Because in the absence of doing that, I can see prior to an election year where there would be efforts made. So I'm wondering, just from a tactical consideration, if this movement or these activities can somehow be synergistically related to upcoming elections and almost put in the form of a referendum in our local communities, and to establish some kind of consensus of understanding as to what minimally our expectations would be, and to make sure that they're synchronized with those who are up for office, as well as those who say they represent us in the community.
Yeah, those things are happening. There's some people here in this room right now I could point to who have been working very closely on that timeline and on process. The process is obscure. The data has not been shared. The idea that we can take 6 lanes out and somehow magically traffic will not be negatively impacted is indefensible, but we're going to get the data. We want a cost-benefits analysis on this PGA course. How much is it going to cost? Who's going to pay for it? How much are we paying? What is our access versus their access? And how do you look at the cost comparisons of different scenarios? The community has given tons and tons of input. It's time for us to hear back. Okay, here's what we did with this idea. This is how much this one will cost. This one will cost, and this one will cost.
So let me also ask if there's anybody else in the group who has an answer or a piece of answer to that question about legal strategies, legislate, or
and folks are working on a referendum.
Mechanisms like referendums. Ray, is that something you have any thoughts about? Come to the microphone if you do. No. Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. Please, would you please? Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Margaret Schmidt, and my partner in Jackson Park Watch is over there, Brendan Elms, and we're an organization that actually found, we're JPAC members, but we actually founded another separate organization about 1.5 years ago because JPAC, in fact, is not representative of the community on these kinds of broad policy issues. Does great work on beach cleanup and soccer and stuff, but not so good on policy. But our mission has been to try to get information about all of these things and then share them as broadly as possible, which is how Naomi and Davis and we all know each other and work together. And so I invite you, we have a website, jacksonparkwatch.org. Look at it, sign up. We send out updates on a regular basis. And one thing, just as an example about the golf course, we have discovered through FOIA-ing and lots of extensive research the Chicago Parks Golf Alliance, which is the outfit that is promoting all of this, was formed sort of as not quite a public-private partnership, but an arm's length removed from the Park District. The Park District is a part of it. It was set up, the mayor is definitely involved in this. The mayor's campaign manager is one of the founders. They hired a golf professional to promote this idea. Carol Adams is working for them, doing community outreach, well-known and well-loved in the community, very effective in promoting this. They have never provided a business plan. There is no real information about how a PJ golf tournament would work in this new golf course they want to create. We are also, again, as Naomi was suggesting, doing research on what would they have to do? How about the U.S. Army Corps? What would they, if they're going to really fix up the shoreline? Aren't there some implications with the environment and with permits? And how about if they're going to really reconfigure the golf course since it already floods? Might there be some problems with contamination of the lake, of the quality of the lake water? So those are the kinds of things we're doing, we're looking into, and as we have real facts, we share them as broadly as possible. Another thing just to mention is we are doing some initial research into the lakefront protection ordinance. What will this do? What will this not do? How might that be a tool for those of us who are concerned with preserving the integrity of Jackson Park as a public asset?
Do you have lawyers in those conversations?
So far, just pro bono so far.
Well, pro bono can be very.
But yes, we have had some, yes.
And are there any possible or emerging legal strategies?
Well, it's really too early. Let me say we work very closely with Friends of the Park. They've been very supportive, and they have lent us some really good advice and resources. So it's all still pretty, we've only really known the full scope of their plans, especially for the golf course, since about for the last month or so. So there's a lot to be done, but yeah.
But so certainly among the questions to be pursued going forward, subject to more information, is what range of legal strategies might be possible, at least to slow the process down and create other forums and settings for
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
what kinds of regulatory requirements are there? What kinds of hurdles will have to be gone? For example, the idea, the traffic numbers that some of you probably saw those numbers. They just came out recently, the preliminary numbers. So as Brenda has calculated, it would mean that traffic by their current data, which we've not seen, Stony Island traffic would increase by 40%, and traffic on Hayes Drive would increase by 400%. In order to close Cornell, as the Obama people wish, and perhaps it doesn't have to be closed, but that's another story. But this is, in order to do that, you can't exactly take Hayes Drive as it is today and do that and then have that traffic. So there are many questions like that. Yeah. So there are many kinds of questions about what would have to be done technically, and et cetera. When we're trying to look into all of that.
And I guess one other question is, how aggressive has your FOIA strategy, Freedom of Information Act requests been? I mean, have you done a lot of FOIA?
We have a lot of information about the golf course. Brenda's our special.
Okay, because we also have. I mean, if we can help at the Invisible Institute, we have considerable experience with FOIA. Yep.
Well, what they say. What they've said now is that they have gotten a grant from the state to help rehab the cultural center. They have said, and they intended to be very gracious, although perhaps, that the cultural center will not be used for the golf course. Instead, they're proposing, with this new expanded golf course, massive expansion, to put a new clubhouse at Hayes Drive and Cornell. And one of the implications of that is that there would be all the golfers would be coming there, not down to South Shore. So whatever the economic impact might possibly have been of having the cultural center be the hub of the golf course would just be gone. It would be zero, because the people would be coming in and out up there. It's really, really practically across from the high school.
So we're saying Cornell would go, Marquette,
Would,
Lakeshore Drive up to Cornell would go.
Right. That is their fantasy plan.
But that still will go past the library.
because one of the things that hasn't been discussed, there are many things that haven't been discussed publicly at all. So these numbers that they put out there that we haven't seen any real backup for at all, but they don't account for the new traffic coming to the presidential center. And Obama has projected over 500,000 visitors a year. And there's also been zip talk about parking in any kind of meaningful way. When Obama unveiled his plans on May 3rd, he showed on his site plan a parking garage that would be mainly underground between the Metra and Stony Island and the two ends of the Midway, if you can all envision that. It's an area that currently has a lot of water in it a lot of the time. But he specifically said, we are not going to pay for that. He also did say, as an aside later on, maybe we would put parking underground under the Obama Center. I'm sorry.
He said in order to accommodate the University of Chicago's expansion.
Oh, well, now that's interesting. The location of the Obama Center right up by the Midway certainly makes it very convenient for people to go to the university, to and from the university.
Okay, yeah. So if you want to, Harold, if you want to come to the mic if you want to.
I'm sorry, it's my bad hearing.
Yeah. People who have questions, come to the mic so others can hear you.
If you look at 55th Street right now, the University of Chicago has taken everything all the way to the Dan Ryan Expressway. The Obama Library is sequestered in their high rise where they've taken over Harper Court, right? The USC is destroying the African American community right in our faces, displacing us, allowing murder and mayhem, allowing our families to be disseminated, taking all the real estate. The Pegasus Group is buying 80% of the real estate in Washington Park. The game is already over in terms of the grassroots community having capacity to build from the bottom up, to hold elected officials accountable of how our tax dollars are being spent to empower us on land we've been on for 100 years. That's the situation that we're in right now. We've been working on these issues 30 years, and they have systematically utilize our own black leadership to disenfranchise the authentic cultural experience in Bronzeville. And they will create what they want to create so that it accommodates a gentrified perspective of the African American experience on the south side of Chicago. And Carol Adams and Dr. Conrad Worrell are in the leadership role in that ruse that went all the way back to the Sawyer Evans fiasco in terms of the politics in the city of Chicago. So know your history in terms of what this battle is about. It's always been about the real estate. They created and fomented the Blackstone Rangers and the Gangster Disciples. I survived that as a kid. So this is no joke. This is serious real estate development, and nobody respects the African American community, including our own leadership.
Thank you, Harold.
Do I have permission from my elders to speak in the room? Ashe. My name is David Peterson. I'm a global ambassador of cultural economic development, specifically in the Pullman National Monument. And I want to just offer an alternative perspective. There are two areas we have. We have an area of concern, and we have an area of influence. Now, I haven't heard anyone demonstrate the capacity to deliver a consequence for what it is that we don't want. So what we could do is think about how we can, make this an opportunity more than anything. Under the broader umbrella of tourism, we have a notion, an ideology, something called cultural economic development, which gives us the opportunity to benefit directly from our history, our heritage, and our culture under the tourism umbrella. Also under the tourism umbrella, we have hospitality jobs, which will create thousands of jobs for people. So while we're worried about what possibly could go wrong, we should possibly also put a lot of energy into what could go right. So when the development comes, because once again, I haven't heard anybody demonstrate the capacity to demonstrate or deliver a consequence for what we don't want to happen. So nobody's going to stop this from happening. So because it's happening, we need to prepare for it. So what tourism does is it offers us an opportunity to create novelty shops, to offer services and products to these millions of people that are going to be coming to this neighborhood. We want to make sure that we're at the forefront of that. We want to make sure that we're at the helm of owning and being the direct beneficiary of our authentic history, heritage, and culture, specifically in the South Lakefront region, including Bronzeville all the way to Pullman. So with that, in Pullman National Monument, on our radio show that we have every Sunday, live from the Pullman National Monument, we're talking about different opportunities that are coming under the broader umbrella of tourism. But culture is going to be the key, because that's what's going to socially and economically prepare us for this paradigm shift that's going on. Because right now what we're facing is economic violence. I'm sure some of you might have heard of that, some of you may not have. Hopefully you'll go Google it when you leave here. But economic violence is going on right in our communities, right around us as we speak. I live on 61st, grew up in the neighborhood, went to William H. Ray, went to lab school, went to Kenwood, lived in Pullman, product of 47th Street, 103rd Street, 63rd Street, all the bad areas you could think of, you know what I mean? I'm standing here before you, I'm not what you see on the TV. So, you know, as I studied in my graduate studies at DePaul, that's where I was molded into this whole area of concern and area of influence. And I think a lot of the times we pay more attention to what's going wrong than what could potentially go right. So with that, those people who aren't necessarily lawyers already and can say, well, yeah, tourism, that's just capitalism, you know, all that. Like, we're not afforded the luxury to turn down any unorthodox way of making some money right now. So if tourism is the way that thousands and trillions of dollars are coming in, that's what we need to be looking at and finding out how can we find our piece of the pie within that. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Michael Madero. I'm a neighbor here. I live down on 61st Street the last 20 years. Couple comments and then a suggestion. It was said previously that, you know, whenever we can make a renter into a homeowner in this community, I think we can only benefit from it. At the same time, there's a couple of things that are going on in and around Jackson Park. They are and they're not related to one another. We have the Obama Library, which I personally see as an incredible opportunity, and we have this LPGA golf course thing that's going on, which I really don't see a lot of benefit from. But we should see those as different entities, right? If we start to put these things together and let our discontent in one area move over into another area, then we really stop seeing, we don't see the process which is going on. If we focus on process, maybe we'd see the light a little bit. The suggestion, in terms of the way we might see process better, is we have a cultural institution that already exists right next to where the Obama Library is. That's Museum of Science and Industry. There's got to be a lot of data that comes out of the effectiveness that MSI has, whether it's jobs, whether it's programming, whether it's the hotel rooms or the economic benefit that the businesses in the area see. If we can perhaps, you know, grab some of that data and see, is that going to translate into the Obama Library? I don't know the answer to that. And I know that the Obama Library is not going to be what MSI is. But at the same time, we can use those projections to maybe say, this is what we're for, this is what we'd like, this is what we don't like. When I see all the buses come in MSI and all the people that come in on the metro or drive in, park, and just leave, I often wonder about the community benefit of an institution. So if we're going to see how something trickles down, let's look at it a little more clearly, because I'm obviously think we have a lot of questions whether something actually trickles down, trickles out, and how it does that.
So there's a very concrete thing for us to look into, which is the community impact of having this immensely popular museum. And it's an open question what that impact is.
I just have two pieces of information. Jamie had asked about legal matters. We have precedent for having a referendum on these kinds of issues. In 1988, dating myself already, we had a referendum on expanding Nichols Park in Hyde Park, whether the lot adjacent to it should become part of Nichols Park. There's a lot of good community activism about it. It was an advisory referendum, but because of the overwhelming support that we got in the 1988 election, that became part of Nichols Park. Nichols Park got to be expanded. We expanded the school a little bit, and then there's also, additional park space there now. So there is precedence if we want to put together a referendum around these issues and put it on the November 2018 ballot. Second of all, in addition to Jackson Park, as Margaret mentioned, the Midway Plaisance is now part of the imprint of this center, and the Midway Plaisance Advisory Committee is going to have a meeting with the Obama Presidential Center folks to talk about the impact exclusively on the Midway, because there are other meetings to talk about Jackson Park. So we're going to talk specifically about what impact the center will have on the Midway on August 9th at 6 p.m. over at the sort of field house, ice house, I guess it is, even though there's no ice right now. The ice house right before the movie. So they'll be there to talk about the impact of the center on the Midway and, of course, on the surrounding area as well. Won't be any discussion of the golf course because that's not part of the Midway, but it's another opportunity to ask questions.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ward Miller. I'm Executive Director of Preservation Chicago. In Chicago, we're an advocacy organization. Focuses just on the inner city, the city limits of Chicago, and anything within those borders. I have a personal Hyde Park experience. My father lived here, continues to live here, and I spent many years growing up in Hyde Park, in the Hyde Park community, both in Kenwood and Hyde Park itself, both on Dorchester Avenue. For some reason, we couldn't leave Dorchester, no matter where we were. Our organization every year produces 7 most endangered buildings in the city that we want to shine a spotlight on. And this year, March 1st, we announced that one of our most endangered places, if you will, was Jackson Park in the South Shore Country Club, now South Shore Cultural Center. And realizing these are amazing assets to the city of Chicago and they're world assets. These are designed by the best of the best, Frederick Law Olmsted. And we're really in support of bringing an Obama Center to Chicago and to its south side, but we are really opposed to using public lands for this use. And there's plenty of room in and around Jackson Park and the South Shore Cultural Center in these neighborhoods to design a big library and center. And it seems like the taking of public lands and the closing of drives through these lands. Cornell Drive was always part of Frederick Law Olmsted's plans. They show up in all the plans that you look online, you'll see them there. It was widened in 1960, but some of the facts about it not being there and its removal for the public benefit and the public good is somewhat questionable in our eyes, as are some of these other things with the golf course, possibly the loss of hundreds or thousands of trees being cut, depending on what aspect of this giant center and complex and golf course we're talking about. And I don't know why we're redesigning Jackson Park to fit a presidential library and museum that still remains undefined as to what will be in it. We know there are no documents, or very limited documents, that will actually be on site for scholars to research. Most of that will be elsewhere, whether it's in Washington or a warehouse in suburban Chicago or elsewhere. We do know that this is a new library, a new concept for a presidential library, and we know Michelle's dresses will be there, and we know some presidential speeches will be there, but it sounded an awful lot like the Lucas Museum to me. So I really personally enjoyed Barack's presidency, and I think it was a great legacy. I think he's bringing some of the politics from Washington to Chicago. If this were not on precious public lands, I don't think there'd be much of a debate here, and I really do think this is shadowing his presidency, to tell you the truth, to have such a debate over this. I'd really like to see this built adjacent to Jackson Park on private lands, have them acquire these private lands, work with the University of Chicago to acquire these vacant parcels, and expand Jackson Park with the new library as an idea. So, but to save face, we've offered some alternate ideas, that are floating around out there. But really, this building and this complex does not belong on the public lands, and it does not belong on the very best of the best designed public parks in the world. And this is New York City would not allow the Frederick Law Olmsted Park to be obliterated by a large complex of buildings and a new golf course. I don't know why we are allowing carte blanche here in Chicago. This needs to be somewhere else, and I know that train has left the station according to our politicians and public officials, but I think it really does need to be moved elsewhere, and I think it's really up to President Obama to rise above the occasion and say this really does need to be moved somewhere else, close by, but not on public lands and not on sacred landscapes designed by the very best of the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Jasmine Adams. I'm a 4th grade teacher on Chicago's Southeast Side. And I just have a few things to say. I also work in a political space, political activism, and I also am a researcher of violence in general. And so my first point is that I feel like everyone in this room is really focused in on gentrification, but we're not having a discussion about capitalism. Capitalism is a very violent system that was created so that no one or no normal person, especially people of color, low-income people, people with disabilities and things of that nature, are able to function in those spaces. So I feel like everyone has questions about what will happen with this and what will happen with that, and the point is for no one in this room to be a part of that conversation. And that's what capitalism does. I feel like if we're talking about, I think in this conversation, we're talking very in the now, and I'm thinking about the students that I teach as 8, 9, and 10-year-olds, and if we're talking about in the now, what are we thinking about for where they'll be when they're our age? I think that the systems in which they function under, which is racism, classism, capitalism, ableism, and things like that, are functioning in the projects in which we have been focusing on in this conversation. I think we've been talking a lot about the library, and we've been talking a lot about Jackson Park, but where were the conversations when University of Chicago was pushing into Washington Park and displacing families and displacing kids from their schools? We can't choose what conversations we want to be a part of. We also can't choose what gentrification is okay gentrification, which gentrification is not okay gentrification. Because technically the University of Chicago is a very violent entity which has been functioning for lots of years. And folks live in communities around University of Chicago, and those conversations have not been had. Yet here we are today at a meeting for 2 hours having conversations about some of the same things that have been happening historically over and over and over. And if we're being completely honest, gentrification is a system that seeks to displace people. Gentrification is not redevelopment. Redevelopment is communal. Redevelopment gives folks in the communities that are being redeveloped chances to make a life for themselves, their children, their families, make better schools, make better opportunities, have community-ran businesses. Gentrification is not redevelopment. This meeting and the suggestions that folks are giving in this room are redevelopment suggestions. Gentrification as a system seeks to displace everyone in this room, and to be honest, folks who need to be in this room and a part of this conversation never get to be in these spaces and a part of these conversations. My students' families will never get to sit in meetings like this and speak their piece, and their ancestors have been living in South Shore and Hyde Park and Washington Park for hundreds of years. And because they don't have the eloquent language to speak their truths, they don't get to speak up in spaces like these. And they're the ones who immediately are losing their homes and immediately are losing their children and loved ones to violence that closely is tied to capitalism and gentrification and classism and racism and ableism. So if we're thinking about like historically, this conversation is a conversation of redevelopment because we want our communities to be seen in a different light and we want our spaces to be something different. But what's happening to us as communities is not redevelopment. It is, in fact, gentrification, and gentrification seeks for none of us to have a space. So I think that our conversation doesn't need to be how can we fit into processes of gentrification, but how can we resist those very oppressive and violent systems to create our own spaces for us, but more specifically for kids her age. Like, she's gonna be the next us, and to be honest, no shade, but as adults, we have kind of failed our kids. we haven't really made wise decisions on where we need to be in the spaces we need to have, because we've been kind of functioning in systems that really haven't vibed with us for years, and we've been trying to function under those things, and now our kids have no place. So my question for us is like, do we see this project as something that we can forcibly move into to cause redevelopment and to cause a shift in language and a shift in actions? Or do we need to completely resist this project and create our own project of redevelopment? Because I don't see our suggestions fitting into gentrification. I don't think gentrification has a space for us.
Thank you. That's a really helpful distinction, I think,
Yeah.
for all of us.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Hi, my name is Julius Williams. I've lived on the southeast side all of my life, and I want to just give maybe some unpopular comments about golf at Jackson Park. And I am a golfer. I think golfers would go anywhere to play golf. I've been playing Jackson Park for about 40 years. And when I first started going to Jackson Park, they didn't want people like me even playing there, even if you had the money. So what I think about Jackson Park Golf Course right now, turning into a PGA type course, I think is great. I wish it could start tomorrow morning. I play in a senior golf league right there right now. The golf course entertains about 20% of the people that live near the golf course. 80% of the people that play the course don't even live near there. And I think that's with most golf courses. So community concerns about a golf course, I just think they're kind of mute. New York has Bethpage Black, where all the pros go to play that course. The community, maybe 15% of the people that live near that course play it. I don't know how many people in this room play Jackson Park. Can I see a show of hands? There are 4 people here that even play that course. 5. So I'm really, I just don't get the concern.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Why don't you come to,
It wouldn't bother me at all. I went out to Medina to see, and I had to go a good ways out to Medina to see the pro tournament out there. I think it would be a great thing for kids that are interested in golf to have pro golfers right near them. In terms of the cost, as I said, I think true golfers would go anywhere to play. I go to South Carolina every spring. They have about 114 golf courses there. When you talk about the price, people pay for what they want, whether it's golf or anything else. I think people that love shoes, they don't look at the price. I know.
So,
People in the city can play the course now. Yes, you'll be able to play it then. You'll just have to. No, I believe you'll be able to play it when you want to. The times when you can't will probably be when they have a PGA tournament.
thank you. Appreciate it.
All right.
Good evening. My name is Paula Robinson, and I'm the president of the Black Metropolis National Heritage Area Commission. What I'm really enjoying about the conversation this evening is that it just starts to feel like we are getting down to plain speak. You know, I'm a PR marketing person, so I know how to put the spin on things. I do come at this from a redevelopment perspective. And I also am in tourism. I'm in heritage tourism development, so I just want to say those things up front. But there are a couple of things that are really starting to resonate in terms of this plain speak, and this is really, you know, what our president, Barack Obama, is, a community organizer. It's getting those things down to, there's certain things that, you know, we just keep saying, this, what you're saying, what's the question? This doesn't making sense. For me, one of the first things, and it's just still on my list, I've said it to the Obama Foundation, and if I had the opportunity to say it to both Michelle and Obama, I still want the first answer, which is why the park? It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense because this has been the president who, to Harold's point, all over the world, all over the country, he did America's Great Outdoors. He said, I want each state to have two places where there is just really this open area. And so in Illinois, the Millennium Reserve was what gave us the nation's largest open space park in the country, on the same size as Central Park, the Grand Canyon. That's how the size of this, understanding this asset, building on, you know, what Montgomery Ward and everyone has talked about, which is this open and free. We cannot give Friends of the Park an opportunity to take a pass on this one. This is what they do. This is why we pay. We have got to understand that there is an inherent contradiction. I think that what Ward is saying about public lands and how dear they are to us, that it just doesn't make sense. And so there's a question that we have to be able to ask that question to them, because everybody keeps saying it in some way or another. And if the answer is because museums of the park will eventually cover some costs, then say that. You know, if the answer is that the real estate opportunity will allow us to compete at the level of a Central Park and what it costs when you have a high-rise, a home or whatever that is around this park. If that's what the answer is, we need to hear it. I mean, we are big people. I think the other contradiction in this, in terms of the whole concept of him talking about every child in the park, all of that, to come to Hyde Park High School, where he did Becoming a Man, where this is a man who is a basketball player, you know. It doesn't make sense for us to say it's okay for Hyde Park High School to lose its track and field. I mean, it's not making sense to me. Now, if the plan is to say, look, Chicago's broke, we are going to, on an international tourism, that's the business I'm in, we are going to have a PGA. We are going to, you know, bring back the lagoons. We're gonna, all of those sports-related opportunities, I like it. You know, I mean, if now we're saying, hey, the kids that went to Hyde Park High School not only were in basketball and track and field, but they produced our next group of golf stars, I like that better. I don't need the library, you know, and if all of this was to get a golf course, then let's do that. Let's make the best recreational, outdoor, whatever that rivals any place in the world. What I'm not liking now, as a PR person, is that we're talking about a library, and your point, Ward, about what's in it, or someone said that, where we're going, okay, if all this is online, and you're really describing it as an innovation center, I am insulted to, as a PR person, I can be insulted, but I'm insulted. You know, to talk now about barbecue grills and basketball at the museum and library. I do not need basketball grills, recording studios, all of this stuff at the library. What we're wanting are young black men becoming a man from Hyde Park High School to experience is not, yes, that's our culture, but that is not what we need this to serve. And you know, I don't want that positioning. It's just, again, it's not making sense. The other things are some of the things that people said earlier, just about, come on, just give the plan, give the vision. You know, the truth of the matter is we have never seen the University of Chicago's plan for this site. I know all about these plans, and in full disclosure, we were one of the groups that competed and felt that there was a better fit in having this at the Michael Reese site. And so I want to say that, but you know, part of this that, again, on the short list, and I've only got one other one that's not making sense, is, you know, in terms of if the plan is tourism, we've been doing that. That's what we're in. What we're doing is showcasing this presidency. This is du sable to Obama. The authenticity of what is here is enough. It's huge. You know, this is the epicenter of African American culture. We don't have to create anything else. You know, the people who are talking, we're having the worst time getting this Black Metropolis National Heritage Area designated. And some of it is because people don't know from a real estate perspective if they want to call it Black Metropolis. Well, quite honestly, the University of Chicago commissioned the book that did the book that's called it Black Metropolis. You know, the things that are already in existence where the National Park Service has the Black Metropolis Historic District. That's what they named it. We're just trying to be authentic in it. And the reality is, it's enough. When the woman who wrote Warmth of Other Suns, Isabel Wilkerson, you know, we had her in for one of our summits, and she really challenged me. She said, "You're really accommodating too much." She said, you're willing to make the migration story the immigration story. It's not. She said, you are willing to say whatever you need to say to try to keep this thing going. She just said, stop. You know, the story has impacted the world. You know, the reason we have the Victory Monument on the corner of 35th and King Drive is because the French said, thank you, I've never seen soldiers fight so bravely. It speaks for itself. If we are doing tourism, I can tell you from our own, we do bus tours every week. What they want is the authentic experience. The international traveler wants the authentic experience. And they will tell you they know more about our history and culture than the young men at Hyde Park High School. I don't need a barbecue grill for them. Last point. But everybody is saying the same thing, and what you're saying is, we deserve answers. You know, you cannot look, you know, we've met with the Obama Foundation. We love them, they're lovely people. But you cannot look at us and say, I don't think we're gonna do a community benefit agreement. What do you mean? You know, we're paying taxes for the park. We will tell you. We're not really understanding who we are in this. And the last part that I heard several people saying was about the privatization. And if in fact that's what we're moving to, we've seen it now with the boat harbors. So let's not act like privatization is not happening. I mean, I appreciate what you're saying about what's happening up at the North Shore, but what we've said, the city is still telling us they're broke. Every single harbor has been privatized. If that's what we're going to do, I mean, Manby on the beach is already happening. The cabanas were there. It was $1,000 if you wanted to. So, you know, that we've learned how to get the money from Lollapalooza and whatever. So if the privatization, because this is really about public land, privatization, historic property, it's really about where Chicago is at this time in terms of what we are willing to stand up for and to question. And I do think that this is not the legacy that we currently think about with President Obama. And if I am that naive in saying that this is hypocritical, and what we then find out is, no, it isn't, you just really didn't know, you know, I want to know that too. So I don't want to be afraid of the answer.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's great, Paul. So one of the things I'm struck by in Paula's remarks, and as some of you know, I've spent a lot of time working on police abuse and impunity issues in Chicago, and really at the center of that campaign has been a demand for transparency. We need to know, we need to have the information. And you know, there have been a range of views and concerns, different distributions of emphasis in this room tonight, but I think the demand for transparency, the demand for information is something that we can all get behind and share in. So I want to just sort of make that theme explicit, although I can never express it as effectively as Paula does. So I think these are the last comments. We're
Okay.
well past 90 minutes, but let's. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Robin Kaufman. I've been around the neighborhood. My first year in college in 1962, I sat in at the university with Bernie Sanders fighting the university's discriminatory real estate policies in Hyde Park. So I've been.
How did that go?
Well, that's a whole nother story. I think, okay. So, I think this has been a great meeting. When they run the meetings, we don't get to speak. But the thing I learned at their meeting, when I saw that picture, 18 stories high, I don't think there's anything that tall in any of the parks in the city. It's outrageous. There are a whole lot of issues that came up tonight, and all the speakers were wonderful. We need to, and I'm taking bits and pieces out of ideas that I got listening to some of the speakers. At this point, we're powerless. We're up against some monster powers who are pushing this down our throats as fast as they can. So we need to try to see where might we get a little power. And two things were said earlier. One, Ward Miller, you said, you said something about Obama. You know, we're not going to have any impact on Rahm. It's damn hard to have an impact on the university. We believed in Obama at one point. It's hard to believe in him anymore. Perhaps we should give him one last chance. Because he was busy in Washington running this country when they had those 3 hearings, which were huge. But what he heard was that the people wanted, because the University of Chicago hired PR professionals to do a very professional job of making it appear. And Leon Finney, who fought to keep the university out of Woodlawn 50 years ago, bust his church members in to make it seem like there was support. But any of you who were there, like I was, and waited to the end, saw people didn't want it. But I don't know for sure, did Barack know that, or was he believing his handlers? Okay? We can talk to his handlers. I don't want to say what I think of them. Another thing that was mentioned is the idea of a referendum. Okay? A neat thing about referendums is it gets people out to the polls, it gets us involved in electoral politics. And that's where the power is in this city. Okay? So, wait, I gotta. So, I guess, the PGA Tour. Okay. We don't, this is like the Olympics. They just want to bid on getting the PGA Tour. They don't even know they're going to get it. So they're going to just do all this stuff and spend all this money, probably a lot of it city money, and run through our neighborhood, and they're not even sure they're going to get the tour. Okay. So what I think needs to happen, there needs to be an organization set up that's going to look at this from a strategic standpoint. Who are our allies? Who has the power to do something? And then we need to come up with a strategy. And it's going to have to be strong. Meetings can be a part of it. There may need to be demonstrations. I think we should demand a meeting with the Obamas, let them know, and let them hear, make sure we got to have transparency both ways, down and up. So I think this meeting's great. I'm sure there'll be more. I suggest some kind of steering committee get put together to figure out how we can proceed to gain the kind of power we're going to need to maybe get some little changes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the last few comments.
So my name's Brenda Nelms. I'm also a Jackson Park Watch. And I want to follow up actually on a couple of things that have just been said now. One, Jackson Park Watch was formed, and our kind of mantra is transparency, community decision-making for public properties like the park, and for Jackson Park and the areas around it, comprehensive planning. All of those things have been mentioned at various points tonight, but I do want to reiterate them as I think they're important. Picking up on her reference and Ray's and others to referendums, or referenda, I'm not quite sure what that is. I think that's important. I think expressing those political values and concerns down the line, but we can't wait to 2018 because the timeline for approval of they're currently working on is that the Obama Foundation wants to go to the Chicago Plan Commission in November. So all of these discussions about traffic plans, the golf course kind of gets wrapped into that, but it's mostly about the Obama plans and the traffic thing are really on a really tight schedule. And I think that's where to the extent we can do anything to slow that down, that we can demand that people don't wait for the referendum. Go and write your alderman now, go call the park district, the mayor and all of that. We need that kind of activity now. I have some modicum of belief that those kinds of voices can be heard. Jamie's demonstrated a lot of that with his work within the Visible Institute and police brutality revelations. And I think it can work if enough people talk up and enough people are consistently saying what's been said in this room tonight and expressing their concerns. And even, I don't know where the golfer went, but the concern with the golf course that I have is not that it would be a PGA course, but that it's expanding its footprint beyond the current golf course, which was they said they would not do. If they can fit the PGA in there, then let them do it. But don't take you can't just take out all the recreation facilities and the nature sanctuary or anything and think that's kosher. So.
Thank you, Brenda.
Hi, I'm Kenneth Newman, native of Hyde Park. Family's lived here 100 years, and we've been associated with the UFC for about 115 years. So anyway, I'm a member of JPAC, I'm a member of MPAC, so both of our parks, and I'm on 2 other park advisory councils, and on the Hyde Park Kenwood Community Action Council, a school reform group. So the theft of the land of Jackson Park is what I'm calling it, because the golf courses of the Chicago Park District don't make money. Maybe Mirovitz makes money. We're gonna have to find out the actual details of that. But they want to spend $30 million to change a golf course, thinking that they're gonna make money eventually. The PGA Tour, again, I work in sports management. I've worked at World Cup, Pan American Games, World University Games, about 200 international soccer games. I've worked in tennis. I even worked in an LPGA event once. So for this course to be changed to potentially accommodate the PGA is no guarantee. The guy who's behind this, quote, Chicago Golf Alliance, this Michael Ruler, he's the former campaign director for Rahm. I'd like to thank Deanna Isaacs of The Reader. If you didn't get The Reader, came out last Thursday, make sure you get a copy of it. There's a very nice story in there about the ins and outs of what's happening in Jackson Park. Meantime, as a member of JPAC, we have harbors to worry about. We have massive erosion on the shoreline. We have athletic fields, so the golf course expansion would destroy the athletic fields on the east side of Cornell Drive that are south of 63rd or Hayes Drive. The track is supposed to be moved to the 150 yards south to the field that's in front of Hyde Park High School. However, there's no guarantee. I have not seen that in writing. The Obama Foundation agreed to that after I kind of exposed the fact that the track and the artificial turf field would be destroyed. When I see that money in an escrow account waiting for it to be, from the Obama Foundation, waiting for it to be rebuilt there, then I'll have a little more faith. But right now, between the Obama Foundation, the President Michelle, and the Chicago Golf Alliance, which was only made up for the change of this golf course, the theft of the golf course into private hands, we need to keep a close watch on all this, and we need more transparency.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Kenny. Okay, you get to be the final speaker tonight.
Hello, my name is Nyela Davis. I'm 11 years old. I really think that we need this library because it can give us a great opportunity to have more chances to read more books, because it's not a lot of libraries that's that close. You have to like travel to get to one. It'd be better off to have one near, so you can, it'd give children a better opportunity to read and to read more, because I want to be a doctor and I want to be able to read more harder books about like learning about the heart, the liver, and like bloodstream, all of it. And I want a library card.
Thank you very much.
I just want to say that I know a lot of people are against the library because of the inconveniences that it will give us, myself included. However, I just think that we need to think about the youth, because they're, just like there are many food deserts and just healthcare, it's the same thing with libraries, and our children don't have anywhere to go. You know, we always talk about the violence and what are we going to do as a community, but then when we have this library, we're talking about how it may be this and maybe that. But you don't know what's going to be in that library. But I know that it's going to be books so that Nyela can read, her sister can read, her classmates can read. They're going to be safe, and I know that nobody will shun them from that library because of their race or their sex. So, you know, I know that I just feel we need to think down the line and think in the future, and, you know, think about the inclusion and our youth. So just, we have to change sometimes, and as far as this library goes, I'm willing to change if it's gonna help my goddaughter, you know, become that doctor and get her a library card that she wants, because she doesn't have access. It's very difficult. So I just want you guys to, you know, think about some things.
Thank you very much. And thanks to everybody. I think.
Oh, wait a minute.
Oh,
Go.
sorry.
And I also think that this is a great opportunity that President Obama is giving us all. Thank you.
Thank you. So, and thanks to everybody for making this a real conversation. You know, when we send out information about a community conversation, it's kind of aspirational, hopeful, and I think we realize the hope tonight. And I further hope that this is the beginning of a process. And obviously, a lot of different efforts need to be made to have an effect on the processes that are underway. The experimental station is always available as a convener and a setting for ongoing public conversation. Thank you, everybody. Good night.